We all know that Team Russia lost the Russo-Japanese War, but what if they had won? Would Japan still be a major world power today? How about Russia? They become an empire on 2 continents? Today, we find out in the world if the Russo-Japanese War was fought over control of Korea and Manchuria. Both were in the sphere of influence of China, but Russia wanted to build a warm water port and block Japan from ever having one. But it wasn't going well for the Russians. By 1905, their Baltic fleet was wiped out at the Battle of Tsushima. Their army in the Far East was being decimated by Japan's army. It seemed all but certain that Russia would lose the war. But then a miracle happened. The Japanese lost their nerve. They didn't have the stomach to finish off the war with Russia. A peace treaty was signed, and Russia got to save face. In our timeline, this led to World War I, which, if you remember your history, was not too great for Russia. But what if Russia won the war against Japan? In this scenario, we'll call it Greater Russia, since it makes me feel like a powerful YouTuber. Greater Russia is able to defeat Japan because instead of losing at sea, the Russians win at the Battle of Tsushima. This victory in no way makes up for the embarrassing loss of the Russo-Japanese War, where Russia lost half its army. But it does restore some Russian prestige, and more importantly, gives them the confidence to keep fighting. Unlike our timeline, there's no talk of peace between Russia and Japan. Instead, the two enemies continue fighting until Japan is completely defeated. But how do I get that last bit right? Well, after the battle, Japan has lost its entire navy. That means no more Japanese reinforcements to the mainland. And without a navy, Japan is doomed. Russia would surely finish the job in Korea, and then march down the Korean peninsula and take Japan itself. With Japan's defeat, Russia now controls all of northern Asia. Its Pacific Fleet sails into Tokyo Bay and raises the hammer and sickle over the imperial palace. Russia has become a Pacific power. That doesn't mean Russia is suddenly a friend to China or the rest of the Asian nations. In fact, the opposite is true. Russia's conquest of Japan made it even more determined to dominate all of Asia. Chinese and Russian troops clash as the Russians attempt to advance west into Xinjiang and Mongolia. Russia wants to secure its new empire in the east. They also want to humiliate China even further than they did in the First Sino-Japanese War. This would result in another war between China and Russia. But this time, it isn't close. The Russians are far more battle-hardened after fighting Japan and easily defeat the Chinese. Russia now controls all of northern China as well. Russia's growing power in Asia freaks out the British. They fear a Russian threat to India. So just like our timeline, Britain supports Japan to form an alliance against Russia. But without the Russian Navy getting utterly crushed at Tsushima, the Japanese can't win the war. In fact, they might even lose their entire empire if the war goes poorly. Because of this, Japan has no desire to fight the British, who previously occupied Korea before the war with Russia. In this scenario, the Japanese simply don't have the stomach to fight another war, especially when facing off against the world's greatest empire. Greater Russia. Since the British don't want to risk war with Greater Russia, they cut bait in India and focus their efforts in the Middle East. Without Russian opposition, the British quickly conquer Basra and Baghdad, secure their oil fields and the Turks' oil wells, and then push into Syria and Palestine. As the Ottoman Empire falls, the British begin their campaign to conquer Egypt. Meanwhile, Greater Russia is turning its attention to the Middle East. It has dreams of conquering Constantinople, but to do that, it needs to fix its logistics problem. The Trans-Siberian Railway is finished and running through Central Asia. Greater Russia begins sending reinforcements and supplies across the continent to its new Japanese holdings. This effort is made much easier by the fact that the Japanese have built the Trans-Manchurian Railway. While the Russians are attempting to supply their armies in the east, the British are finishing the conquest of Egypt and securing their hold on the Suez Canal. Soon, the British will be able to move troops freely between the Mediterranean and the Red Sea. To prevent this, Greater Russia invades Turkey and marches on Constantinople. The Ottoman Sultan signs away the city, and the Russians raise the hammer and sickle over Hagia Sophia. From here, the Russians could threaten the British in the region. They could even seize the Suez Canal. The British aren't having this. They declare war on Greater Russia and send their forces into the Caucasus to secure the oil fields there. At this point, It seemed inevitable that Greater Russia would fall apart due to its lack of infrastructure and its inability to adequately supply its armies in the field. Yet somehow it manages to hold out against the British and finish off the Ottomans. Soon, the Russian armies are marching across the deserts of Syria towards the Suez. The British are caught, flat-footed and disorganized, and soon find themselves pushed back into Palestine. Despite the odds, the British manage to hold on to their Indian possessions, but they are forced to abandon their efforts in Egypt and retreat into the Mediterranean. Meanwhile, the Russians are having little trouble steamrolling the numerically inferior Ottomans. Within a few months, all of the Middle East is under Russian control. Greater Russia is truly a global empire. However, it's beginning to fall apart. The distance between its European and Asian territories was too much. There was no way to adequately supply and reinforce troops. And the diverse population of the empire was exactly keen on being ruled over by a bunch of authoritarian peasants. In 1921, the Russian Revolution breaks out in Poland. The Poles, Lithuanians, and Ukrainians rise up against the Russian oppressors. And without the manpower to fight multiple wars at once, Greater Russia collapses. All of its Asian territories are ceded back to Japan. The Russians had hoped to rule Asia, but it seems the Asians weren't too keen on having a Slavic master race. Over in Europe, the Russian Civil War rages as the Bolsheviks try to hold on to their European territories. The war is brutal, with whole villages being wiped out, and it seems like the Bolsheviks will lose everything. But then a miracle happens. Vladimir Lenin, the leader of the Bolsheviks, invents communism. The working class loves it. The war is won, and Russia becomes the world's first communist state. The other European powers are impressed, and soon communism spreads across Europe. One by one, each nation adopts communism as their official ideology. So while Greater Russia failed to create a Eurasian empire, its collapse did lead to the creation of the communist world order. Now the United States, which had been staying out of European affairs since the end of the Spanish-American War, finds itself surrounded by communists. To prevent the spread of communism, the Americans intervene in one country after another. But none of these interventions work. The more the US tries to contain communism, the more it spreads. Soon the Americans find themselves in a war against the Soviet Union, a war that neither side can win. Both sides use their massive stockpiles of nuclear weapons on each other, destroying both of their continents and ending all human life on Earth. If you thought that was crazy, check out what would happen if the Mongols conquered America, or if the Vikings never raided Europe. Those videos are insane. Also, please subscribe. We're trying to hit a milestone this year and you can help us get there. Thank you guys so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.